Right now at the Vision stage, we're again in the investment arena, a topic of very, very, very high interest here at GreenTech. And our title is De-risking investment in vertical farming in particular. And we have with us Gus van der Vels from the Farm Tech Society. We have with us online as well, Gayla Laskar from Barclays. Hello, Gayla. And we have Nicole Thorpe here from Cultinova and also the Farm Tech Society. So, Gus, let's set the scene first. What's it all about? De-risking investment for verticals.
Well, if you look at it, the vertical farming comes from basically a technology push, technology development, which is being married into traditional horticulture. And this is, of course, a new investment proposal that puts a lot of new questions on the table that people need to be able to answer before they can actually take the risk of investing. And what we want to do with Farm Tech Society is actually build the information needed to make those decisions a little bit easier. And so we're looking at a couple of things that we can do there. First of all, we also did a session on that yesterday, is that we're looking at to collect data from farms so we can know what they do, how they perform, and that helps us also to predict the performance in new investments.
So transparency in the entire process and showing investors, okay, this is what you can achieve?
Correct. The other thing, which is also quite important, we think, is that we help the development of the workforce needed in farms so that the people are properly educated, therefore can also run these farms to the maximum performance.
The growing community,
the growing
especially.
community.
Yeah.
It's not just the farmers, it's also the people running the farms that are basically in their marketing, in their supply departments and other places.
Yeah.
And finally, also quite important, it's a new game, if you will, in farming land, which also means that we need to work with the regulators to make sure that the rules and the laws on a national but also on a supranational level are there to support this new type of farming so that it also can be economically viable.
Well, we've spoken at length really with various investors and financiers as well. So Gayla, I'd like to bring you in here. Why are you even looking into vertical farming? What's your motivation?
Well, I'm the U.S. thematic analyst at Barclays, and so vertical farming is definitely a theme that a lot of investors are interested in, and hence are interested in as well. I think a big part of it is the fact that you have a very environmentally friendly process, and it's very socially aware as well. So that's why we're looking into it, and it's kind of our job to take a theme that's very, very new and try and put it out there for investors in a way that they can kind of process it and also give them a good foundation for building on as companies become more and more prominent and hopefully public.
And do you see it as being part of, a big disruption in the industry that Barclays as well is interested in being a part of?
Yes, definitely see it as being a big disruption in the industry. I think that part of it as well is kind of going through what it would take to get there, because there are some hurdles that need to be overcome. And so I think it's kind of clarifying that, but certainly do see it as a theme that's here to stay.
Good. Hold that thought about the hurdles. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Nicole, what is your viewpoint in terms of vertical farming and where we're going? I'll give you a bit of input. We had just a pulse check almost of where vertical farming is in Europe and where it is in Korea with some guests yesterday. And I just asked them to put on a scale of 0 to 10. Where are we in Europe right now? And it was about the Green Deal and what's going on there. And it was 0 point something. Okay. And our Korean guest agreed entirely. And then the second part of that question was, well, when are we going to be getting to sort of 8 at least? So fairly ubiquitous vertical farming all over the place. And for Europe, it was sort of 2030, 2031, so sort of just beyond the horizon maybe. But from Korea, we got the clear answer. Well, we're a bit quicker in Asia. So 2025, at the very latest, we're going to have vertical farms all over the place.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
First of all, interesting statistic, interesting estimates.
Well, I wouldn't call it a statistic. It was just to grab grabbed out of the air.
I actually watched this live yesterday, and I found it very interesting to also, see the scale where people see it. I think it's notoriously difficult to predict this because we are lacking data. So this is something that a gap that we're trying to fill with what Gus has just mentioned, the Farm Tech Society. But I think data is the key to this, and until we've got that, I think it's going to be a bit of rule of thumb measure and estimate. I think probably agree that Asia is ahead of us in Europe, but that's not to say that we can't catch up more quickly. So I think it's a good estimate. But
And when you come up with that data, and when you are, a bit more easily able to show the business case, what kind of investors are you looking to try and persuade, if you like, and convince to get engaged? And how easy is it to do so?
I think we need to change the capital stack somehow. At the moment, it's still very much venture capital based, and I'd like to see more patient capital, so something, moving more towards maybe family offices and, different non-venture capital and cheaper capital as well. I think that's what we're aiming for, something a bit more long-term.
Long-term, well, we had discussions with Rabobank here and also with a family office, which were very interesting, and it was extremely long-term. I mean, literally many, many years. Perhaps less so for vertical farming because of the tremendous dynamics in the market right now. But what's your viewpoint in terms of, engaging more with those longer-term perspectives in the investment community?
I think basically it does go back to being able to present a proposal that is worth investing in and also taking the risk for. It depends also on the appetite that is for the particular investor. But also I think it would be quite important to make sure that we have the, this secure and safe foundation in this from a legislative point of view. Already the EU is spending probably the largest amount of their budget on agriculture. And I think definitely also these new types of agriculture need to find a place there. Not just because it helps also get, say, a little bit more patient capital in there, but also it helps to provide a basis that people can make a long-term investment decision in, which also means that they don't need to be in a hurry to get their money out.
But Gus, I'm looking at us in the mirror, and I'm a European as well. I know I'm a Brit, but I'm also a European. And, we like to wait for the legislators to come along, get the policy in place. And, Gayla's sat there shaking her head thinking, my God, if you wait that long, it's going to be 50 years before we even start. So those guys, they just go out there, they form a special project acquisition company, a SPAC, and just get on with it. And you see, 80 acres raising loads of capital, and you see App Harvest going out there and doing all their stuff, and they just laugh at us, don't they?
They do. And I think you also have to find that indeed there are differences in how things are done in different places in the world. And I think traditionally we've always seen that in the States things can happen a little bit quicker than they happen in Europe in general. I think it's a mix of both. So you need to have the right investment environment, and you need to get the people on board that want to do this. Fortunately, you're already seeing that there is actually a lot more technology capital coming and interested in this new application than before. So it's definitely a much bigger pool than the traditional agriculture investors. But still, they want to have their questions answered, and they will ask lots of questions, and that's what they do because that's what they're trained to do. So again, we get back to the point of creating the data and making sure that the information is available as much as possible so that the insecurities and the uncertainties are manageable. They won't be gone, but you can try to make them manageable.
Now, Gayla, you probably represent part of the investment community that does have the long-termism that Nicole was talking about right here. And in the analysis of the marketplace, which you're doing, you must be watching as well some of the, the larger risk takers, shall we say, and those that are really jumping in and forming SPACs and doing all this kind of stuff. What's your viewpoint as to why that is coming around, and how can we maybe get to this longer-term investment scenario that Nicole was also advocating for?
Well, I certainly think that the huge demand there for opportunities that can be more environmentally sustainable is certainly driving a lot of that. But I would say, when I talk to investors who could be considered more patient capital, there still are a lot of questions for sure. They are oftentimes new to this space entirely, so they're trying to get a sense of how this fits within broader ag. They're trying to get a sense of business models. They're trying to get a sense of metrics to compare one vertical farm's approach to another. So there certainly are still a lot of questions, but I do think that there's some who are willing to kind of make that leap and take that bridge a little bit faster than maybe others.
Good. And Gus, obviously, we talked about scaling up, and scaling up as well in a vertical farm context does have a human capital element to it. And that presumably will come to the investment hurdles in a moment, Gayla, but that presumably is also a big hurdle in getting to the number 8 or number 9 or 10 on the scale.
I would absolutely think so. In other areas, I've so often compared a vertical farm to a Formula One car. It's a very nice bit of kit, a very nice bit of technology. If you don't have a proper driver's license, you crash it. And so the same thing happens here. If you have a machine that can do wonderful things and that can be very, very efficient way of producing food, but if you don't operate it to the maximum yield, you are wasting your money. So you need to have the people on board that know how to do it. And of course, you can also get some support from intelligent computers and from sensors and other kinds of things. But a proper autonomous farm, I haven't seen them yet that can actually get to the maximum yield possible. So you also need to have people there that know what they're doing. And then that bit of training needs also to be developed, and it's also going to be a big element in building the security that people need for their investments.
We had a discussion quite a lot about that human blockage almost, and just in the previous session there was a hint that perhaps certain regions will have to go much quicker and almost leapfrog technologies to have even more autonomous vertical farms or greenhouses. It was greenhouses in this particular case. And there was also a sentiment that maybe, the last place that this kind of technology would be applied would be in the more mature markets like in the Netherlands. But Nicole, in terms of that human resource element and maybe other regions in the world, do you have any ideas, solutions for how to build up the amount of green thumbs out there to manage all this and design and direct it?
Do you have a solution? I wish I did. I think one of the parts of it is communicating this to the wide audience, and this is another thing that we're doing at Farm Tech Society, for example, is making sure that we spread the word to kind of make farming sexy again, almost. And I think it's collaboration with as many university and company collaboration. I think that's something that's really, really important. Give people access to experience, really, and starting at school age, ideally. I think this is something you can't start early enough, and let more ladies in, let more women in. Kind of STEM related degree courses, and kind of open it up and communicate, shout from the rooftops. That's what we need to do.
Well, Gayla mentioned that the time is ripe, that society and the sentiment there towards healthier food, to what Gus was saying, more local production, maybe directly in the urban areas as well. It's certainly there. And we also had some input from the TU in Delft and from some of the greenhouse and the growers that, they are getting a lot of interest and people knocking on the door saying, oh, we want to be part of this big movement. So presumably, Gayla, that is, if I can ask from a US perspective, something you're seeing there as well, that people are very interested in, more and more interested in the food chain and the food system, and therefore that will drive changes and transformation?
Yes, I completely think that that's the case. I would agree with Nicole, though. I think it involves partnerships with universities and being able to kind of prepare people for these types of careers. But I certainly think there's an interest. I think some vertical farms, in fact, are very focused too on training people to kind of run their own autonomous vertical farm. So they're making an effort there as well. But I think there's a huge interest in our food supply chain in general. I can't speak for Europe, but in the US, definitely has come to the foreground. And then with COVID, of course, you've seen probably even bigger interest in figuring out our supply chains.
Okay, let's come to some of the financial hurdles that we wanted to try and cover. What do you see as being the major blockages at the moment to directing more investment to vertical farms?
So I think part of one of the big questions, like I kind of mentioned this earlier, was really just understanding the business models and trying to get a sense as to, when you have this huge CapEx investment, how does it end up working towards profitability when you're kind of delivering a commoditized product? And I think part of that comes with understanding all the nuances of the vertical farm's business model, because there's vertical farming, but there's many different ways you can approach it. And so when you have an investor coming to the, I guess, conversation and trying to get an understanding of it, It's really just giving them a sense of, okay, here's how it can work, but also here's all the many different approaches. So if what doesn't work for one farm, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work for another farm. There's certainly different ways to approach it. So that's one of the big hurdles, is getting that basic understanding. And then I think I would go back to the data, being able to compare vertical farms, not just to one another, but to understanding why a certain technology is better or it can be more enabling in the future. That's a big part of it. But then it is, of course, getting a sense of standards. You can say, okay, this is the capacity, this is a throughput, this is what we can actually do. This is how it can be a platform for other types of crops down the line. So certainly that data is one of the big things that investors will call and ask for. And I unfortunately can't really give it to them in the way they want it, but I know that it's coming. So that's great.
Okay, so Nicole has issued one wish, if you like, and that's for more patient capital, as you put it. I'll take that as your wish list as well then, Gayla, really I'm going to put that to Gus as well. Better understanding of the business models, more data, benchmarking, standards to be able to make the case for the investment. How do you respond to that? What are you going to do?
Well, what we are doing is we already have a nice project going with also a researcher from the University of Liverpool who's putting together a predictive model on the benchmarking data. So we're collecting data with participating companies. We're making this also a fairly low hurdle for these companies to actually enter into the program, and we treat the data with the amount of confidentiality that it deserves and needs. But still we can extract interesting predictive KPIs from that data that tells a little bit more, okay, what do we know from the farms that succeed? What do we know from the farms that fail? How can we compare these things? Can we say something about the amount of yield that we can expect from these farms, the other kinds of success metrics? So that's being built up. Of course, it's a crowd wisdom affair, if you will. So we're actually also encouraging our members and others to join and to contribute the data in this safe way, so we can get this comparative data. And that's mostly on the, I would say, on the economic performance where we're looking at. The other thing which we'd also like to put in there is get a little bit more insight as well on the growth data. So understanding what makes a good growth recipe and why does it work well in one farm and doesn't work so well in the other farm. So that goes more under the hood, I would say, in looking at, okay, what's the microclimate and what are the things that are really making the plants perform. So those are really, that bit of data analysis is something that's quite strong for us.
You mentioned privacy of data, and also there's a certain intellectual property element in that as well. How would you gauge the willingness to share data at the moment? And sort of, is it, C, D, E plus?
It's a very careful process, let's put it that way. So we also realize this. So we understand that also we're in a very young market, and a lot of people think they have thought of something that nobody else has thought of, which gives them a competitive advantage. And obviously that needs to be protected. So what we're really looking for is to do this basically at this point, starting out at a very much of a pre-competitive level, the basic things, those things that you can easily compare to each other, but also that gives the participating companies a way to gauge their performance and maybe their improvement potential as well. So it's not just giving things, it's also getting things back.
Good.
And so that's what we're trying to put in place.
All right, so we have the wish here for more patient capital. From patient capital, we have the wish for a better understanding, more data, more benchmarking, more standards. And your wish is, give us the data so we can do this.
Exactly.
Is that about it?
That's right.
Good. Now, we did have a discussion. I mentioned it a little bit before, and I'd be very interested in Gayla's perspective on this. There was a bit of a debate about centralized versus decentralized in terms of controlled environment agriculture, not only vertical farms, but will we be doing lots of stuff in the cities? And we even had this morning a presentation of home farming, and very interesting. And we saw the home farm as well in Taipei in this particular case. And some of the people we've had at the stage here have said, well, that will remain a kind of a niche area, and it's great, it's a good part of the mix, but actually we need to centralize things around nodes of transport 2 or 3 hours away from the city and make sure we're producing things there and then taking it into the city. And others were advocating something in between perhaps. Gus, how do you see that? And then the question to you, Gayla, is what would you bank on one or the other or all of them? And what do you think about home, maybe as a laugh, off the record, what do you think about home farming and investing in that? But first to Gus, what do you think is the best mix or no mix, or is it left, right?
Well, it depends. I personally, I don't believe personally too much in large-scale farming in the middle of a city. It's just, first of all, it takes a lot of area, which it may not be available. Second of all, the buildings that are there are not easily converted, or you need to build something new. Third of all, the real estate prices really are not really conducive to a farming operation in the middle of a big city.
We had the message as well that quite often just distributing it from the center of the city means you've got any way to transport the produce out the city to the logistics nodes, and then it gets transported back in.
And then also, if you just look at the nuts and bolts of building a farm and the logistics around it and everything else, it makes a lot more sense to do this in a place where you have a little bit more room and where you can also have the docks for the trucks and everything else. So I would expect it to be more on the periphery of a larger city. Indeed, in, say, logistics zones, distribution centers, that would make a lot of sense. Maybe even a little bit further away if it's on really larger scale. On the other hand, I do see an opportunity also for smaller scale indoor farming in a city, but that would then be related to, say, food service or a restaurant or some other, or hospitals perhaps, where it's a bit more of a small scale thing, but maybe also a little bit more special.
I've seen restaurants in Amsterdam that have their own greenhouses and growing their own herbs and lettuces and leafy things there, and I have to check that out one day.
And for a restaurant it can work, for a supermarket it doesn't, because the restaurant can play with what they have.
Yeah.
The supermarket needs to have everything all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Nicole, I think just in the same sentiment really, and let's talk about food security a little bit. So there's a big breakdown more recently in supply chains, not only of fuel, but also of the food supply chain. And a big move, I mean, let's put Brexit down on the table, to be a bit more autonomous and not dependent on imports from outside of a country's border. Do you think that's going to have a big influence as well on vertical farming, urban farming?
I think so. I mean, we all like our strawberries at Christmas, don't we? So, you know, I think Brexit and COVID has really brought to, you know, the general public's awareness that, you know, self-sufficiency is maybe not such a bad thing, or at least increased self-sufficiency. So from a food security point of view, I see this vertical farming as an important, but not single part of it. It's a part of it, basically. It has its space, but it won't be the silver bullet which will solve food security, but it's part of the system. Definitely.
Part of the system, okay. Gayla, in terms of sort of priorities or what, you know, are attractive propositions for an investor, larger, centralized, perhaps more traditional solutions, or more radical, decentralized, or all of the above?
I would say all of the above. I think it really comes down to the business models of the different farms. So if you have a vertical farm in a city, it can certainly be incredibly value add, not just from providing farming, but from a redevelopment perspective. So there's a lot of additional benefits that come with that. I think an ESG investor looking at a wide slate of benefits would probably be attracted to that. Beyond just a more environmentally sustainable product. It's got a food desert application to it. It's got a nice city redevelopment aspect to it as well. But of course, the considerations are you're going to have limited capacity. You're going to have probably higher labor costs, which is going to be a big part of that business model. So I think it depends on the right business model for the right location. But that being said, I certainly do think that probably the ones that are on the periphery are going to be the ones that are pulling a lot of the weight. And seeing a vertical farm 2 to 3 hours away is much better than getting your strawberries shipped thousands of miles across the U.S. So certainly, I think that's still a great proposition, and it just depends on how they're implementing them, where they're putting them, and who they're partnering with as well. So I would definitely not rule out one or the other. I would peek under the hood on both models.
Good, but again, data, benchmarking, standards, please, and then we can make some more informed decisions is the basic message there as well. Exactly. Nicole, your wish list was almost, you know, quite generic almost. Do you have anything very specific towards the investment community that you may wish to express in terms of, you know, help us out here, guys? Obviously, patient capital, fine. And I think one of the solutions post-Brexit involved patient capital in the UK, some 40 hectares which were built pretty quickly with pension funds.
I was going to say less red tape. I think that's another thing, especially if we're talking talking about sort of urban and peri-urban developments. I think getting planning permission is still, if you're building something new, is still something that holds up a new development, at least in Europe. Can't talk about the US, we'll have to ask Gayla about this. But I think that's another thing, less red tape and more openness to trying out new things.
Back to Gus's point about policy making and getting things together. Good. What is in your estimation, the sentiment amongst policymakers, and how far behind or ahead of the curve are they, let's say in Brussels, when it comes to vertical farming?
To be frank, I think we still have a lot of work to do to educate the policymakers. So even though agriculture is a very important topic in policymaking in Europe, I think there's still a lot of it goes to traditional forms of agriculture. And there is definitely, we've done several events with policymakers in the EU, in Brussels, and they appreciate it a lot when we try to help them, but also there's definitely a knowledge gap that needs to be crossed. So, and having said that, you do see that there's interest, you see there's growing interest, and also with the Green Deal and other kinds of initiatives being rolled out, you do see that people are looking for ways to get to better forms of farming. So there's willingness, but there's also a big job to educate.
Gayla, there's almost a perfect storm in the US at the moment when it comes to, less dependence on, I don't know, Californian products, for example, and there's tremendous climate change challenges all over the world, but we're seeing it very vividly on the TV screen in the States at the moment. And then we're seeing great success stories with SPACs raised, 80 acres, App Harvest, aero farms, all these wonderful things coming up. And that is, I don't know, it's like the American dream coming true, or these great entrepreneurs who've done lots of good things, I don't know, in the renewable energy industry, and then they're moving to this. So I imagine that the politicians are all over this and saying, yeah, no, we invented this. Is that how it is in Washington at the moment?
I would say more from the vertical farming perspective. I was speaking to vertical farmers. There's not a lot of mention of policymaking as being a big hurdle. So that you could presumably say that that's something that people are really getting behind. But I actually did want to make a comment to something that Gus had mentioned a little bit earlier, if I could, and that's just around the data sharing aspect, because going back to kind of the hurdles and what the data, he mentioned that companies are a little bit more hesitant to share, especially at the early stages. And I did just want to say, and talking with vertical farms, one of the things I think is really beneficial in having candid conversations and being able to publish on the industry is being able to get certain messages out there in a very benign way. And it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off, I think, being able to talk about some of the hurdles without talking about a specific farm. I would just kind of put that out there, that sharing this data can kind of take a little bit of the pressure off in a lot of ways too, because it does kind of set the baseline. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a high baseline. It could be a very, very benign baseline, and help people, I think, kind of set their expectations right for investing. So sorry to digress, but I just wanted to add that as well before we run out of time.
Absolutely, Gayla. That's a wonderful addition to that. So really in your final statements, the future, of course, the future of vertical farming. How ambitious are you, or how confident are you, Nicole, about the vertical farming scene in Europe moving forward?
I'm very confident. I think it's definitely taking off, and I think that with the right infrastructure and the right support, policy support and financial support, we're definitely going to charge ahead. But it's going to be part of the system, so it's part of the bigger picture. But I have very high expectations and high hopes for the industry.
Magnificent. And Gayla, to you, your confidence in vertical farming and the developments in North America?
I'm very confident as well. I think, but I agree with Nicole, it has to have certain support. But I think it's a matter of when, not if. And I think when you look at climate change, like you mentioned in California in particular, seeing what's happening to the Central Valley, you need a solution. You need something more sustainable. So there's no option, I think, in my mind, to not look at vertical farming and what it can do on a much bigger scale.
So Gus, basically to summarize, we need the business case. To get the business case, we need the data, so share the data, please. And to be able to execute, we need less red tape.
And we need the people trained.
Yeah.
The people trained.
And the standards.
And the standards. It's only 5. It's on one hand. This can't be so difficult. 5 major wishes here from the vision stage here at GreenTech for vertical farming moving forward. Okay. Ladies, thank you very much. Gus,
thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful continuation of your day, Gayla, early in the morning for you.
Thank
but
you.
We really appreciate you joining us. And yeah, we'll be looking out for some great news of investments from Barclays in this area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. So, our next and indeed final session, don't cry, final session for the vision stage here at GreenTech is all about, again, the future of CEA, in particular in Europe and North America. So we're going to be touching on similar topics, but giving a kind of a 30,000-foot view of that. And I'm delighted to be joined then at 4:30 our time, that's in just under 15 minutes, with our guests for that concluding session. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.